When I heard about the initial push into Iraq, I did not know enough about the war to make any decisions. At least in the beginning, during 2003 and earlier, I really didn't make a decision until probably 2000, my junior year in high school in 2004, that I really wanted to join the army. When I got out of basic training, I was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division. But when I got there, there was a message sent to the brigade that different units are looking for volunteers as they get ready to go to Iraq. And so me and my closest friend, who I call my brother, Rob, we had heard that from our first sergeant, and the first armored division was looking for volunteers. The first as they got ready to go to Iraq, and so we went to our platoon sergeant. Our platoon sergeant put our names in, and then me and Rob had just got done doing PT one morning, and the first sergeant called us in the office with our platoon sergeant and told us that if we were serious about this, there was paperwork we needed to do, and we had to go to the battalion office and all that stuff. And me and my brother was like, absolutely. Mind you, we're 18-year-old poor black kids, and they're telling you we're going to let you go to Iraq tax free, and give you a bonus for going. So we were assigned to 137 Armor with the First Armor Division, and so when we got there, when we were there with Fort Bliss, we had to. It was, I want to say, about three straight months of being in the field, maybe 4 straight months of being in the field. It was Monday through Friday, and then we'd come home Saturday and Sunday, and then Monday again we'd go back out to the field. It was like that for about 3 straight months because we were getting used to the tanks and the way the First Armored Division did things. So nobody knew that I had volunteered my first tour in Iraq. Nobody, kept it to myself. And in fact, nobody knew until I got to Iraq.
What was the primary motivation to volunteer? You mentioned the bonus, and of course, for young people, that's, especially if they come from modest backgrounds, that's going to be attractive. Is that the main attraction, or is it partly, was, the possibility of getting into action, was that also attractive in its own way?
We didn't know what war was. We had seen, me and my brother, in our minds, war was like that movie Black Hawk Down. And it was very glorious and very amazing. And you're going to be shooting things and destroying things. And it was just awesome. But we had no idea what war was really like and going to be like. But I would be honest and say, yes, initially, the combination of those two things, the combination of being a war hero and going to war and fighting, and the fact that we didn't have two pennies to rub together at that time. And they're telling us we get it because I remember it was about a $3,000 bonus we got for going to the most money I'd ever had at one time. And on top of that, it was tax free for the time we were there, and we get to go and fight in tanks. And we, in our minds, these tanks were indestructible, and we didn't have to worry about anything. And we were just like, this is a win-win for us.
Tell me a little bit about the tank. I mean, how many soldiers are on a tank, and what are the different jobs that they're doing?
So on whether it's any Abrams tank, at least during the BDU era, you have a four-man crew. You have the driver, the loader, the gunner, and the commander. So the driver obviously speaks for itself. His sole purpose is to hop in and drive the tank. The loader, his job is to load the main gun, the 120 rounds for the main gun. He also has his own 240 machine gun, which is right. If you once you stand up right above his hat, he has his own 240 machine gun that he has to maintain and operate. And then one of the biggest things I would say for the loader is he's responsible for the radio. Um, as as you're preparing your tank to go out on patrol or go even in training just to go out, it's the loader's job to make sure you have communication with the other tanks and with the company and battalion frequencies. So that's actually a very big. The loader is a is a key piece of the tank And then you have the gunner. The gunner is actually the one who is in charge of the tank. The gunner is usually either a specialist in E4 or a sergeant. There's been times where I was a corporal. I was a corporal gunner, but it's very rare you see a corporal gunner. He's either a specialist or a sergeant, and that person is in charge of the tank. Everyone on that tank answers to the gunner. His job is whenever you're in the motor pool during in garrison doing maintenance, doing anything on the tank, it is that gunner that is there, making sure that everybody is doing their job, that all the equipment on the tank is accounted for. In a tank platoon, there are four tanks. You have the platoon leader, who's the lieutenant, his tank, the platoon sergeant, who's an E7, his tank, and then you have two what are called section sergeants. If you look at it from an infantry point of view, those would be squad leaders.
Did the insurgents, you're in operations in Ramadi, Baqubah, and Sadr City, um, and through two tours. Did the insurgents ever come up with something that was a serious threat to the A2?
IEDs were a threat to tanks, period, and EFPs.
Hmm.
So when we first, I'll not we, but the army as a whole, when they first got to Iraq and during the first two Thunder runs, they although they encountered fierce fighting from dismounted infantry, enemy dismounted infantry, the overwhelming notion was the tankers were able to easily dispense of the dismounted infantry. Yes, they lost several men, but in general, looking from a mission, if I'm a brigade commander, I look at Thunder runs as the overwhelming success. We were able to kill a lot of the enemy and go in there and destroy. But then after that, the enemy started realizing the makeup of these units. They started realizing that what a heavy brigade coming to my area meant was that there was going to be tanks and Bradleys. And me as an insurgent, I have to figure out how to stop these tanks from coming into my city, because if I can do that, I can level the playing field. It's no longer a tank versus dismounted infantry. It is infantry versus infantry. And this, although the Army's infantry during that time was second to none,
Right.
um, it levels the playing field. So IEDs, I saw IEDs and deep buried bombs that were just merciless on tanks. I saw an entire tank get ripped in half by an IED with my own two eyes. It's
Wow.
um, IEDs were they got progressively more dangerous over time, especially during my second tour there. So I would say IEDs were not just to tanks, but to every vehicle. But IEDs, because it ended up becoming the biggest killer for American troops, coalition forces during Operation Iraqi Freedom. So yeah,
Wow.
definitely, I would say IEDs were the biggest threat to us.
Right. So, I've heard about IEDs, taking out Humvees and even MRAPs, but I mean, it's amazing to hear you say some were so powerful they're ripping apart a tank. Tell me about this is something that I'm thinking a lot about now as I'm talking more to Iraq and Afghanistan vets. And I'm thinking about the psychological toll of these IEDs. And let me spell that out a little bit. Of course, Vietnam veterans like your dad, they're going to hit mines and they're going to hit traps, but they have a lot of opportunities to fight back. I'm hearing from Iraq vets that at a certain point in the war, at least for some of them, what the war is like is they go out and they know they're going to hit an IED and there's not going to be anybody to fight back against. And just
Right.
how incredibly frustrating that is because you're getting hit, but you can't really fight back because all the enemy's doing is planting IEDs. Now, that's not everybody's experience, but that's some people's experience. To what extent does that fit with your experience? You're just going out and there's just this feeling like somebody's going to hit an IED. Does that fit with your experience? And then secondly, I'm interested in just the psychological toll of the war being characterized to a significant degree by IEDs.
So IEDs were incredibly frustrating. I was so let me say this: our experience as tankers with IEDs were not the experience of a light infantry soldier, like with the 10th Mountain or the 25th Infantry Division or some of those. Um, when we got hit by an IED, yes, like I said, there were instances where tanks were destroyed, but that wasn't an every time experience. Um, you could almost you can bet your life that if you were in a Humvee and you hit an IED that was any decent size, probably the Humvee was going to be destroyed, or at least at minimum not be able to continue on the mission like normal. So there were many times where we hit IEDs and we continued. So we had, I know with the First Armor Division, we had a routine. If we hit an IED, every time we hit an IED, we had to send that incident up to the company command. So a lot of times it was, you know, we hit an IED, send it up to command. Hit an IED. This is the location. The command staff would be like, Are you still good to go on the mission?" Roger. And then we can continue on. That was that. Bam, boom. We're still good to go. Continue. Boom. We're still good to go. Continue on. So um, now, as far as now, immediately once you hit an ID, yes, you're scanning, looking for if it was detonated or if it was pressure detonated. So if it's pressure detonated, obviously somebody set it up for you to drive over it, and they're probably not sitting there watching. But there were some that were hand detonated that once they hit, obviously you're looking for the trigger man and looking where the wires go, and there's no scanning vehicle that we have that was better than the tanks during that time. So it was very vital that we scanned once we hit an IED. But I never looked at it as frustrating as far as not being able to find the enemy immediately after an IED hit. It was just frustrating and scary to deal with IEDs in general, because you never knew if this was an IED that it was just some IEDs like legit. You didn't even it was a bump in the road. It was like running over a pop can in the road and going about your day. And then some of them, like I said, I've seen tanks where they hit one and the electronics in their tank they're messed up. Now they can't continue on and they have to get get somebody a wrecker to come out there and pull them. The one thing I would tell you is it slowed down the mission tremendously, because some of those IEDs, whether it was in a tank unit or an infantry unit when we were doing Overwatch, if they hit an IED and it destroyed the Humvee or a couple of Humvees, you had to stop the mission. You had to call the company. The company had to call battalion, send in the QRF, the quick reaction force. You had to wait. Sometimes that took 3 and 4 and 5 hours just because you ran over one IED. And on top of that, you still had to finish the mission that you were sent out there to do in the first place. So that took a 6 hour patrol to a 11 or 12 hour day. And that's what was frustrating to me.
Two deployments, 2006, 2008. You're in one of those positions where, you're outside the tanks. I'm assuming that you had, one of those jobs, at least
Yeah.
part of the time you're out there. Walk me through when you picture yourself on that tank, half your body's outside that tank and, you're doing your job, you're on the mission. So you can see yourself there, kind of the craziest day, the most intense day, whatever it is that comes to your mind, as I'm saying this to you, what comes to your mind? You're out there, you're on the mission, you're seeing what's going on, you got your weapon, and then something happens, and now we've got incredible intensity. We got something that's burned into your memory, completely. What comes to your mind?
The firefights. The first time I was in Iraq, I was the loader of the tank. I was a big guy. Even when I was in the army, I was a bigger soldier, and so the most comfortable place on the tank is the driver. He has the most space. Um, but you want a smaller driver. You always want a smaller driver because you want somebody that if something goes wrong and they need to get out, there's a place where they can lean their seat back and you can grab the driver and you can pull. You want a smaller, more agile driver. The loader, you want somebody that has some muscle on them because they're slinging the main gun rounds and putting them, loading them up. And you want somebody who can not only do that, but who can manage the radio, who's smart enough to manage the radio, and who's smart enough and has a discipline to maintain his 240. So the first time I was in Iraq, we had we had an awful lot of firefights the first time because we were under the command of a man named, at that time, Colonel Sean McFarland. Colonel McFarland was he was an armor officer. He was a tanker, and he was. It was very unusual to see an armor officer in charge of an area like this, of an operation like this, because there was just this notion that armor officers were there to blow up everything, and they didn't have the nuanced education of an infantry officer to know how to deploy dismounted troops, which is the furthest thing from the truth. Because armor officers, when they go to school to be armor officers, they have to learn about being on the tank, but also have to learn how to be a cavalry scout, a dismounted cav scout. So they know both better than almost any officer, especially during that time. Colonel McFarland had an idea, and that idea was to find an area, clear it, set up a base, hold it, and then from those cops, those combat outposts, then start patrolling outside of the city instead of going from being at the major, huge FOBs, the operating bases, and then sending men out. Colonel McFarland had an idea of going out and setting up these cops, these combat outposts that were really small. They were company size, and and then sending out patrols within the city. Well, we had to go in and take these areas, whether it was a gym, whether it was an old building. Some of them were nice buildings that were taken. Some of them were terrible, disgusting buildings that you had to make work, but you had to fight your way into those places. And that's where all the major firefighting was coming in, at least in the beginning. And then once you got the cops and the company set up the cops, then you had to fight to to get the city right. We did not just go out there and just start putting main gun rounds into everything. Because Colonel McFarland was told that he wanted to take Ramadi, but not to destroy, not to make Ramadi what happened in Fallujah, where they just put main gun rounds and bombed everything they could see. So that was the biggest thing of the constant firefights and the constant fighting that it took to get the cops, and then the patrols and the constant firefighting that it was on the patrol. That's probably the thing that sticks out to me the most about Ramadi.
So I'm guessing you can kind of play you can play videos in your mind of these firefights, right? Maybe to a degree they kind of meld together, but I'm guessing you can play videos out in your mind when you think of these different firefights. Um, if from the videos that you can play out in your mind of these firefights, you like just capture a snapshot, I'm just interested in what you're seeing. You're on that tank, you're engaged, there's a firefight underway. What kinds of things are you seeing that are still in your memory?
So I remember I remember actually most of my firefights, but the one in Ramadi is probably my first one. I'll tell you about that one. I was again I was the loader, and I was up and I was on my 240, and we were coming up to a building that we were instructed to take, to an building we were instructed to take, and you see muzzle flash. You saw muzzle flash. So then at that point, you're listening for the commander to give you instruction at that point. And so once the gunner was like, hey, muzzle flash, dismounted troops, this direction, I got behind my 240, and I started, the commander was like, suppress the fire on them. And so because we had Bradley company with us, and so Bradley, a mechanized infantry company with us, and so we laid down suppressive fire. The gunner was laying down his coax fire from the tank, and I was laying my 240 fire down at the enemy, and that was the very first time. It was incredibly scary because I think you'd be lying to saying like, what if I get shot? What if I die right now? What what happens, but the adrenaline is going, so much adrenaline going in your body at that time, especially being my first time, that it was merely just target acquisition. Where did I see the muzzle flash coming from, and sending rounds down that way. It was a situation where we sent suppressive fire, and then shortly after we sent a couple of main gun rounds downrange as well. So it was incredibly intense the first time I got to a firefight.
There are three major operations that you're involved in: Ramadi, Baqubah, and Sadr City. Um, were these different? Were these fights different? I'm sure there are similarities, but you know, when you think of Ramadi, Baqubah, Sadr City, were there things that sort of made them distinct as well?
So Ramadi, we still had the ability to put main gun rounds in buildings. We still had the ability to, um, the way we were set up, we were still putting main gun rounds in buildings. We were still destroying buildings. We were still, the tank was very much so in the fight in Ramadi. But Cuba, we could not maneuver the tanks within the city as well in Baqubah. Baqubah was a lot of overwatch positions where the infantry is actually in the cities clearing the room and you're overwatching on the outside looking for snipers, looking for enemy dismount on roofs and in buildings, things like that. So there was a lot less main gun rounds. I would say Baqubah was more of a small arms fire when it comes to the tank. It was more the 50 cal being used, the coax, the 240 from the loader, as opposed to the main gun. Now, Solder City, which was the last fight I was in, Solder City was a situation where there was a man named Colonel John Hort. He was with the 4th Infantry Division. He was an infantry officer, and he wanted to build a wall. He wanted to build a wall. Now that was when I was with the 25th Infantry Division. I was on a striker at that time, an MGS striker, which is an MGS variant. And Colonel Hort decided that he wanted to build a wall to put a space, put a vice between, make it harder for the bad guys to enter a certain section of the city. Well, as they were putting up the wall, so imagine this is the wall being put up. On the other side of that wall, you had enemy snipers, you had RPGs, you had guys going up to unhook the crane while they were being fired upon by the on the other side. So our job was to put main gun rounds into the area behind them, put coax rounds into behind them. Bradleys are putting tow missiles and putting 25 mic rounds to suppress all that fire to allow our guys to put walls up. So I would say Solder City is the most fun I had because um, there were hundreds of main gun rounds, not from us, but as a whole, there were hundreds of main gun rounds used in Solder City, hundreds of tow missiles used, and we were legit from day one going there, scanning, watching, overwatching while guys were unhooking the crane and putting up T walls on top of each other. That's all we were doing day in and day out was firing main gun rounds and firing coax rounds at the enemy. That because the enemy was that is although the fight in Ramadi and Baqubah were fierce, there was fierce fighting. The enemy in Sadr City did not give up. There was no man. They got tanks and MGS strikers and Bradley, so we need to stop firing. There was none of that. It was every single day while we're putting up walls, sniper fire, AK-47 fire, RPG was the worst in Sadr City. RPG fire. They were doing all this stuff to try to kill the men that were trying to unhook the crane, to try to stop the vehicles, to try to unhook the operators that they were trying to lay the T walls. It was incredibly hectic, but it was adrenaline filled on some of those days because there were many days where we would fire 30 and 40 main gun rounds. You know, at the enemy over there because there were buildings and structures over there that they were constantly firing from, and it was a lot. It was a lot, but it was a situation we knew if we didn't suppress them and keep the enemy and keep those main gun rounds going and keep those coax rounds going, that those guys unhooking the cranes, they were easy targets because there was nothing stopping the enemy from killing those men that were unhooking the cranes except them being scared that we were firing on them. That's the only thing that was stopping them. These enemy fighters would, especially in Ramadi, we called them AQI, Al Qaeda in Iraq. They would go and fire an AK at a tank and not think anything of it. They would go and be in the middle of the street firing an AK at a tank, knowing full well that the tank has a main gun round and coax and the 240 from the loader station that they could return fire. Didn't care, did not care. Same thing with Bradley's. There's so many instances where Bradley's were. I saw Top Gun type target acquisition from Bradley's. The training that those Bradley's gunners do, and the mechanized infantry that the Army had at that time was just second to none. But enemy would see, they would go out there with machine guns right in front of Bradley's, and Bradley would just rip them to shreds, and they wouldn't care. They would more 30, 40 more would come out after that. They did not care. Coordinated attacks we saw a lot more of over time, where they call them complex ambushes. That's what the term is. Where there's they set this up ahead of time where an IED would be in place. It would hit maybe the third and the first vehicle and the last vehicle, and then you would have enemies from the side coming in and RPGs and suppressive fire. While that's going on, the enemy started trying to figure out ways to destroy vehicles. They got a lot more complex and they got a lot more organized over time. They started realizing more what needs to happen instead of just firing at the enemy, firing at us, firing at coalition forces. What do I need to do to slow this patrol down, to slow this operation down, and make it so we can either escape or we can kill as many coalition troops as humanly possible? Snipers became a thing, a bigger thing. Snipers is, I would say, other than IED, snipers is the other thing that can completely slow down an operation. Because if you're on dismounted patrol moving towards an objective and you take sniper fire, even if it doesn't hit anybody, let's say they miss, you have to stop everything you're doing and now focus on that sniper. And you have no idea. A lot of times you have no idea who it is, where they are. You just know the direction that it came from. And so now you go from maybe doing a humanitarian mission in the city, a presence patrol in the city, to now you have to clear dozens of buildings looking for a sniper, and oftentimes you wouldn't find the sniper. So that sniper fire was frustrating because it slowed everything down. You knew as soon as you heard sniper fire that it was a complete hold to the operation. Now, what I would say, the caveat to that is if you saw where the sniper came from, if somebody was just happened to be scanning and they saw a muzzle flag, then yes, you can return fire on the building. You can call for air support, whatever the situation needed to be. But otherwise, that would stop patrols dead in their tracks. So,
Are you touching partly on the rules of engagement?
yes, there was when you're hit with sniper fire, this is what you have to do. When you hit an IED, this is what you have to do. When you're clearing a room, this is what has to happen before you have to have overwatch. You have to have an inner cordon. You have to have an outer cordon, and then you can go in and start clearing. It was never we saw a bit. We're just running in, and now, mind you, if you're under fire, sometimes those rules they go a bit not completely out the window, but you have to kill the enemy one, and then make sure that you and your men are as safe as humanly possible while you're doing it. Sometimes that means you have to skirt the rules of engagement every now and again once the bullets start flying.
Is one of the challenges of being in combat in Iraq that the insurgents can figure these rules out and then use to their own advantage?
So I didn't experience what I'm about to tell you as much as I know for a fact other units did. A lot of times these enemies would, pop out, fire, and then drop their guns and then just blend in with the crowd. And you as a soldier, even if they popped out and let's say they killed 3 or 4 of your men, you don't know because you didn't see exactly who that soldier was. So now you have to guess and go in and clear a room. Now, let's say you go in and you clear that room and you don't find any weapons, well, you just can't arrest everyone and say, oh, we all going. That's not how it works. There's no positive ID. There's no reason you have to arrest this person or that person. So a lot of times the enemy knew that, like, I can just do pop shots and then blend in with the crowd. There were certain instances like the Republican Guard and where Republican Guard usually wore a color, whether it was white or all black, depending on which one. There were certain times where units in Ramadi, you could tell what they were wearing because they were wearing all black or they had the gear on or something like that. So sometimes you could tell, but a lot of times there would be people in a shirt and some sweatpants with an AK-47 firing at you. When they see you coming, they throw the weapon and they blend in with the crowd. That's incredibly frustrating. one of the pictures I sent you was a picture of me. I have my arm around a guy. Um, his name was Thomas Watson, and we took that picture right before we went out on patrol because we were just like our platoon was like we don't have any pictures of us, just relaxing, and he was like I said, he was my driver, but we were very close. We were incredibly close, and he he was Irish. He was Irish, so he always had a four-leaf clover necklace, and he would kiss it before every patrol. And and then so on that day on that patrol, we were out, and um, we hit an IED, and it damaged the front of the vehicle, and he died. He died in that. It was a terrible thing. The IED that was a one of the worst IEDs I ever hit. The other thing that sticks out to me is um, I was one of the firefighters. I had a malfunction. This is the first tour. What I'm talking about now. When I was in Ramadi, this is why I love my platoon sergeant. Um, his name was Sean Centers. His name was Sean Centers. Um, Saved my life. So we were taking fire. We were taking fire, and I had a malfunction in my 240. It wouldn't fire anymore. Now, mind you, I never claimed to be a perfect person, but our platoon sergeant was meticulous about making sure our weapons were clean. We did a functions check on them, so it was. We knew when we went out on patrol that if something happened, it wasn't because it wasn't clean. It wasn't because we didn't maintain it. Just weapons break down. It's just the way things happen. And I could, and it was jamming, and we were taking fire. We were taking fire, and it was bad. And he yelled at me. He was like, "Get the down!" And so, I told him, he was like, "What?" He was like, "Why aren't you firing?" I was like, "Sergeant, like it won't fire." Until he told me, "Get the f down." And so he came over there, and then he was like, he was telling me things to do to fix it. And the gunner was because our gunner was the best. He was laying down suppressive fire, but enemy was they were coming up on us. They were walking up on us, and one had fired, and it bounced off the tank, bounced like right near me, bounced off the tank, and another one came, and then it was from one fire, and it was several ping, like ping, 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 right near me. Right before that happened, he pulled me down. My platoon sergeant pulled me down, um, and I'm certain had I been standing up still that I wouldn't be here talking to you today because I was so focused on, I was looking down and I wasn't even paying attention. I was looking down, trying to fix it and not looking up about what was going on. And they were firing and like right as he pulled me down right as I was looking up. And right after that, he told me because I had my M4 in there. He was like, forget about that. He was like, just use your M4. He was like, we'll fix it. We'll fix it later. He's like, use your M4. And so, but I was just such a dummy and an idiot. Wasn't looking. I wasn't paying attention at all to what was going on at that moment. I was just so focused on trying to fix the 240.
Wow.
Um,
And then
so
he pulled you down just in time.
he pulled, yes, just in time.
As you look back on that young Andrew Wright in that tank out on missions, hitting IEDs, some of the IEDs are just bumps in the road, some of them are more serious. You mentioned your buddy who was lost, that kid who's in a lot of firefights, that kid who's doing overwatch for other soldiers out there doing their work, looking for the snipers, etc. You proud of that kid?
I am. I'm very, very proud of that kid because he learned how to endure. He learned how to endure. That is one thing I tell my children today, and I hope they tell their children. Nothing you ever want to have in life that is good, you get there without the ability to endure hard times. It doesn't matter what job you have. There's going to be a boss that irritates you. There's going to be a promotion you didn't get. There's going to be times where you don't have any. My daughter, she just got into medical school. I told her there's going to be times where you're hungry and you can't eat what you want. You can't go to parties. You have to study. You get a D or an F. There, you have to learn to endure bad times in life. Um, And if you can endure those bad times in life, if you can get through those bad times, and the good times will come. You just have to be patient and learn to endure. And so that's the biggest thing I learned from, my time as a young man. I feel that it is my duty to, um, because I am historian of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and it is the most undertaught aspect of military history today. It is sad and sickening on some levels that schools have. If you look at some of these schools that have a military history program, World War One, World War Two, Desert Storm, um, all this stuff, Vietnam conflict. Nowhere in there is there sections dedicated to Operation Iraqi Freedom and to the Iraq War, and it's terrible. And that's one of the reasons I got into this field, not only because I was a part of that conflict, but because we need to give Operation Iraqi Freedom the same reverence that we give the Vietnam conflict, the same reverence that we give World War One and we give World War Two. Yes, I understand that this probably didn't have, not probably, it didn't have the implications that World War Two had. I understand that, but to not talk about it and to not give it reverence and to not give it classes and to not be able to educate the masses about that is completely disrespectful to the thousands of coalition force soldiers, sailors, marine airmen that we lost. And that's a terrible thing. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, is to shed that light about Operation Iraqi Freedom. I'm going to spend my career continuing to write books, continuing to write articles, continuing to give speeches and lectures about Operation Iraqi Freedom, continuing to push for classes about Operation Iraqi Freedom, because this is a story that needs to be told, and that's the education. It's a part of American history now.